before I get ready for work. Now, if y'all don't know, I basically played Guild Wars for a long time, PvP, PvE, all that. I'm not a big fan of the meta builds. We had a guild that was set up for warriors and other things, right? I stopped playing the game a few years ago. The last build posting that I had on YouTube was basically the Ultimate Warrior build. When I came back to Guild Wars, they have completely changed that as far as I know. I still need to do some more research back in what I was doing in those days, but for the most part, they changed a bunch of the warrior traits. They no longer have the trait that gives you um, basically 1,000 armor or whatever and heals you when you break out of stuns. So what I was using doesn't necessarily apply as much anymore. However, I still think what I'm going to show you today is a build that has a couple of different variations. It's hybrid damage. You can use basically any weapon that you want with it. It's a warrior build that's pretty strong. It's going to help you like through all of the early game, late game, basically most of everything that you could do. Um, Maybe not help you with meta events with people that want meta builds for specific reasons, but warriors have apparently taken a big hit since then too anyway, so the banner warriors and everything else aren't really a thing anymore, I guess. So I don't know what they're doing in meta events, but basically if you get into Guild Wars 2, as far as I know, they still have the level 80 bonus buffs that you can get. When you get those, they used to give you this celestial armor. So you can pretty much use whatever class that you want. Don't make me influence you. I ain't going to say warrior's the best, but it is my favorite for the most part. Celestial armor, I think, on the warrior is pretty decent. I think the engineer is also like one that people say is pretty good. I'm not a big fan of engineers though. But you can see celestial armor. It gives you a good selection of all the stats, basically everything. Now, what we're going through here is that you get power, precision, toughness, vitality, ferocity, healing, condition, concentration, expertise. I believe they added a couple of the abilities that weren't on the list onto that like a while back. I'm pretty sure I read that somewhere. Um, but what's going on is warriors naturally have a higher base health and a higher base armor value than most champions. And I believe for the most part, people were running like 1800 armor or something on warriors in the past. This one's still floating around 16. You can up that if you want. I haven't really bothered, okay? But to get into the build, we have the celestial armor from the 80 level 80 buff instant level up. And then we had Ruins of the Tempest, which were about 2 gold right now. But this used to be something that we were testing with with a different build that we were having, but then I figured out that, it's really not that bad. So what's happened is in the old Ultimate Warrior builds, we had might generation, all that stuff, and we were trying to, if I'm recalling correctly, get infinite duration boons on our warrior. So we had infinite quickness, we had infinite protection, we had infinite vigor. I think we had infinite resilience or something like that in the past, and then we had a bunch of damage, but it was all power. So looking at that build now, it's still good. I think it's better just because you have uh, on that build specifically, it doesn't run shouts. It runs things like Sign of Stamina with infinite vigor. And so you get a bunch of endurance regeneration and you can dodge damage. Well, dodging damage for the most part is the best way to avoid dying in Guild Wars, right? As long as you can dodge, it doesn't really matter what your armor values and stuff are. However, with warriors that use things like Flurry or 100 blades and stuff, if you're locked in a skill animation, you can't move. So that's where the armor and all that comes in, and it's a little bit more important. You can still run if you want with this build. It's very flexible. you can still run Last Stand and get the Vigor, and you can run the Endurance Signet if you want and get a bunch of dodge rolls if that's what you're into. But what this is going to come in, I'm going to show you 3 different versions. So the main version that I'm going to show you is this. We're going to use all the same skills. It's very basic. You don't have to change much of anything. The only thing that you really have to worry about is the third trait line is pretty much optional, and then the Phalanx Strength and Empower Allies is optional. So if you're with a group of players, 4 or 5, or in a Zerg or whatever, and you can reliably apply DPS and get reliable might generation and all of that, then Empower Allies and Phalanx Strength, because you're going to get more healing potentially as long as you can continuously do DPS with that. Now, if you're solo or you're not able to deal a bunch of damage to people like around you, if there's a lot of immunity or there's a lot of time in between combat, or if they're just very mobile, so you have to like run place to place and chase them down, you can go Vigorous Shouts, which will reduce your shout cooldown, and then Shrug It Off, which will give you an additional a little bit. I mean, technically, you can still do Empower Allies if you want, and it's going to give 5 might, which this goes up to 80 health. So you're looking at 400 health per person around you. So if you have 5 people around you, then you're going to be getting that 2,000. And it's a quicker cooldown than this. So if you want more total healing, you can still go for Empower Allies and get that generation. But basically, Vigorous Shouts and Shrug It Off are going to give you more healing when you're by yourself. That's basically it. If you have a group of people, Empower Allies and Phalanx Strength is going to give you a lot of healing, as well as keep everyone up to date with might generation. We have Cleansing Ire because we're using a bow on this build, which is pretty simple and basic. You can use pretty much whatever you want, but with core warriors specifically, I prefer Cleansing Ire. Now, if we do a different build version where this last trait line you go for the Spellbringer or Spellbreaker, you can potentially drop Cleansing Ire because it's only going to remove 1 condition for you. And if I was going to do that, that's where I would take Vigorous Stance and Last Stand. But we'll get into that here in a second. How this build is working basically is burst skills are inflicting weakness. Weakness gives them 50% chance to fumble, which is like 50% damage negation. You can go Dog March if they have a bunch of crippling effects or whatever. If you do that, you can also swap your skills or whatever and apply weakness in another form. But right now with this setup, unless you need the regeneration, if there's a bunch of cripple or something, just stick with the Coal of Weak. It's going to give you mass AoE damage, mass AoE weakness, which is going to help reduce the total amount of damage that you take, probably more than Dog March would heal you. So that's the main consideration that I take there. We have Endure Pain and Signet of Lesser Endure Pain. This is just because it gives you 8 seconds of damage immunity. We run Defiant Stance because that gives you 12 seconds of total damage immunity plus healing. So that's really good for using the Flurry. It's really good for boss fights that you don't necessarily know their combos or anything. Anytime they look like they're charging up something really powerful, you can just use it, and you generally can soak through it. So all that's really good. It's good for taking on multiple enemies at once. Now, if you end up not running those, then you're gonna run into issues because you don't have things like the Great Sword evade. So you're going to need to dodge a lot more, and at that point, vigor and all that's going to be a lot more important. But any case, now for the bottom thing, this is where it gets interesting. So this is the damage setup for basically if you're with a group and you want to do more DPS, or you're with a group and you're by yourself and you want to do more DPS and you go for the shout healing. We get Furious, which gets critical strikes, grant bonus adrenaline, and gain a stacking condition damaging effect up to 25, maximum stacks that you can get from this. And so it gives you a lot of increased damage. Then our critical hits are giving us a 33% chance to inflict a bleed, right? And the bleed duration is increased. So this, with the armor and the ruins and everything else, is giving you basically 100% bleed duration without any increased bleed ruins on your armor, uh, or bleed sigils on your weapons. The ruins on your armor is what pushes this up to 100% basically, because the Rune of the Tempest is giving you bonuses to all your stats, and then you're getting plus 25% condition duration. And then when we go look, we're at 95% bleed right here. And if we do one change, we can get this up to 100, but you're basically going over 100, so I don't bother. 95 is perfectly fine. Now, your burning from your bow, it goes up to 82% here. We do not have any burning or base condition increasing sigils or anything on our bow. We have the one that stacks and gives us extra condition damage. We do have burning on here, but the one that gives 10% total duration means that you could get your burning technically up to like 90% here as well. And then if you decide that you don't want to run, say, the shield and you want to go double sword, the base damage on this rip and impale, which I like this ability just purely from nostalgia, but this gives you more might, 10 stacks, okay, when you rip some from your target. So if you're going for the might generation on your character, if you're in a mob and you don't care about DPS or defense and you want more DPS, you can get 10 stacks of might and then apply all 10 stacks of that to your allies. So it's going to be a massive healing for you, as well as a good chunk of damage, and you're getting 5 stacks of torment, right? So you can get 2 of these off, and you can get 10 stacks of torment or something on an enemy champion. And if you want to, you can do the tormenting ruins, but I'm not recommending those, because basically you could get your torment up to 100% increased torment duration if you wanted to, and it would make that really strong. But this is fine. 5,000, 6,000 damage a second if the foe is stationary. Not that hard, especially with all the immobilization and stuff we have, but single target damage, not the craziest thing in the world. And then the reposit, I mean, it's decent. Not as good. I mean, you can still reflect projectiles with Shield Master if you want to. As far as I know, that's still in the game. But getting adrenaline, you have a bunch of bleed. You don't need the extra bleed. The block is fine. But this is more of the aggressive thing that you could do if you really wanted to on your character. Anyway, so you get additional bleeds here. Now, we get into this. This is where the damage is coming from for the most part. You could take Blade Master if you wanted to, and this is mainly if you're going for the Torment damage. But for the most part, we're doing Sundering Burst. And this build is more focused on group warrior combat. But you can use your burst skill from your bow and your sword. You can easily get this up to 20-25 stacks of vulnerability and keep it up consistently, which is increasing your physical damage and it's increasing your condition damage. So we can get that up to 20 stacks, so you're getting 20% increased damage, which is already pretty big. And then we have gain conditions when you damage when you gain fury, so that just helps your sword and your bow out more. And then here you could technically go with expertise based on precision. This is what changes your burning and your bleed damage. So if you do the 10%, if you do the expertise and precision increase, and then you put that ruin on your bow for the extra 10, you can get 100% bleeding and 100% burning duration. However, I just don't think it's necessary for the most part. And also, this increases your power. So if you're running Signet of Rage as a solo, if you're by yourself and you don't need the banner, then Signet of Rage and the Lesser Signet of Might right here together will give you ferocity stacks, and you can float around 4 or 5 stacks of the ferocity, which is giving you like a 20-25 damage increase on your physical damage, as well as some unblockable attacks, as well as some additional might here as well. So, and it's a 20-second cooldown and 10 stacks of might, which is pretty good. So I wouldn't throw that out. It's pretty good on its own. And then using a burst skill grants Fury. Fury gives an increased crit chance. Our crit chance is floating generally around 50-60% on here. You can use consumables if you want a little bit higher, but for the most part, that's fine. But what you're getting is like a 40 to 50% damage increase on your physical damage right here, and then you're getting the 20-25% increased condition damage, and you're getting to cover up your conditions with weakness and vulnerability, so your bleed and burn is a lot harder to remove. Now, physical damage wise on this champion, we were kind of on par with our other power build that we were using, what was left of it after the nerfs, as well as being just more consistent, having the burn damage and stuff on. Now, we were able to get 3,000 bleed and burn damage a second, basically, on multiple targets with this, and then hit for, 4,000 or 5,000 damage, well, with auto attacks. So you start adding that up, I mean, you're doing 10,000, 12,000 damage a second for the most part. You can get this lower if you really wanted to, and change some things. But if you're not going to run Lesser Signet of Might, say that you want more DPS, but you're going to run with a group of people, then you can bring Banner and then just swap this over to Wounding Precision. And you're not going to have as much physical damage, but you will have more burning duration and stuff. So that's probably fine for the most part. Alright, now, for a defensive setup, if you don't really care about having more DPS on target and to your mobs and all that stuff, and you want a little bit more defense, you swap out the bottom tree from arms to strength, and then you can get Might Makes Right, which gives you the endurance regeneration. If you want more damage potential, you can just use Berserker's Power if you want to get that 21% damage if you really want. It's not bad, 21% damage increase. And then this other stuff, when you disable an enemy, you get quickness, but it's not really necessary. The movement speed is nice, but the thing with the warriors, like, they added all these quickness traits, and you could probably get away with using them. They're not bad. I liked quickness in the past because I noticed a lot of warriors weren't really running quickness, and it allows you to get your bleed stacks off faster and allows you to get your DPS off faster. And if you could run more quickness, then you could basically out DPS your enemies. But in PvP type situations, 100% quickness doesn't really matter so much for me anyway, because you have to stick on your target, and if you can't stick on your target and you can't survive long enough to catch them, then you basically just need more defense, more ways to catch them. Quickness it's gonna help, but the movement speed bonus I like. It looks like you could potentially get your warrior moving really quickly, which would be quite interesting, especially with a sword, because you get the cripple on your auto attacks. Anyway, this gives you more power when and crit hit chance, which is fine. This actually gives you a little bit more crit than the other one, so you get up to 60%. Then you can get Forceful Greatsword, which, if you're fighting in big groups of enemies, this is going to give you a bunch of some might generation, which will give you a bunch more healing. You could still go for Body Blow if you want, but if you do that, I'd probably just change Call of the Week, because if you use Body Blow, you have 3 uses of your Blinding Arrow plus your Shield Bash, which will give you 20 seconds or so of weakness, as well as this really long bleed. And then you can just, it takes 20 seconds for one of these to recharge. So you can basically keep up infinite weakness there if you really want to on a single target. If you have multiple warriors, then you can keep weakness up basically infinitely just by cycling out your different bow skills. But What's interesting about Body Blow is that the bleed duration on this is like 20 seconds, which you can see like all of our other skills, it's like 10 seconds. This one gets up to 13, 3 stacks of bleed, doing 2,000 damage. So, and then that final thrust. But yeah, I mainly just use the bleed for defeating regen for the most part. So like pin down, you're gonna hit that 7,000 damage over 20 seconds. So basically, if you use this, your 3 blinding arrows are going to apply 20-second bleed for 1,000 damage. Your shield bash is going to apply 20-second bleed, and your pin down is going to apply an additional 20-second bleed. Or it's just gonna be a 20-second bleed. But anyway, that's already 5 20-second bleeds right there. So you can see how that adds up. And this is doing 6 stacks. These will all be 1. So you basically get you're gonna get 4 stacks, and then you're gonna get an additional 6. You're gonna get 10 stacks of 20-second bleed with a full combo rotation, which does a lot of DPS, and it's a very long duration bleed burn. So I think that's really good. And if you get multiple warriors on one person using that, I mean, you're looking at a lot of stacks of bleed that are going to last very long. You don't really need anything else if you do that. That also means, though, that if you don't want to run a sword, for instance, and you still want to run this ruin page, that you can just swap this sword out for an axe or whatever and do more physical damage. And then you're still going to have all that bleed damage, the long duration bleed damage from the shield bash and the blinding arrows, right? So it means that you can go a physical build and still get benefits from using uh, uh, conditioned damage, because you're still going to be applying bleed, doing most of your stuff. So I mean, it's a lot of versatility in the build, but I think it's going to be pretty good. And you can still go dogged march, and if you go dogged march, you can swap out and take body blows, and then you lose the forceful greatsword, but dogged march is going to give you a really high regen thing. So, and this is basically infinite regen if they're crippling you a lot or mobiling you a lot. And you got 10 seconds, well, 8 seconds there, but basically it's going to go higher at some point. And you can still go shield master if you want, if you're like PvP and you want to like reflect the damage back to your enemies. And then you just take the body blows, you take the shield master, all that stuff's going to be really good. And then you still have the options of shrug it off if you're solo player and you just want a little bit more health and healing for yourself. Then Might Makes Right is just going to heal you a little bit more, and then Forceful Greatsword is going to give you a little bit more regen. So it's just more of a defensive page. And then you can take Dogged March, and you can swap out Forceful Greatsword for Body Blow if that means you can't stay on enemies, or you can teach this and just do this. All that stuff's fine. The third thing is that if you're going to do kind of like the Ultimate Warrior build was, then you can go for Spellbreaker, which on this character we don't have it unlocked, but I could make the build and show it on my other character. But Spellbreaker, you lose your endurance bars. You can't use 3 endurance bars anymore. You can use 1 at a time, basically. Something like that. And so Cleansing Ire doesn't become as good. It's still okay, but if you do that, then you can get access to, you could use Stalwart Strength to get basically infinite stability if you want with your bow and with your shield. You could use Last Stand, which will give you basically infinite vigor. You could swap out your Shake It Off and use, I mean, you could swap out pretty much anything. You could even swap out Endure Pain if you wanted to, and put in the dodging signet. That 50% endurance regeneration. There's a lot of different things that you can do there, but that's just going to allow it to where you can dodge more often and not have to worry about it. But the good thing with Spellbreaker is you have the tether, which is going to give you more total might generation. So you can see here as a solo player how I could get more might and heal myself here. But if we get the Spellbinder, you're going to get more total might potentially with Tether, as well as a CC ability to keep people there. And Tether can heal you for, if you have allies around you, that's potentially a lot of might, healing, and generation. And if you have 4 or 5 warriors together and you're all tethering somebody, then it's not a good chance they're going to get away. Plus all the immob from your sword, immob from your bow, all that stuff's good power balance, I think, for the most part. And then the other thing with it, and the main thing with it, is that with the spell, one of the first abilities that you can get is the counterattack, and then you can make it to where your counterattack gives you protection, and then you can make it to where your counterattack applies a slow debuff to enemies that slows their like skill recharge and cooldown, and their movement speed and stuff, and their cast times. So if you have a group of warriors with that, you're going to basically be able to slow them down quite a lot, as well as have a bunch more interrupts, which can basically shut a player down if they're doing AoE damage or something. Like if you have 4 warriors that are just running a bunch of interrupts like that, and then they get the tether effect, which is going to give them more regen, and then they're going to get the protection effect, which is going to give them more protection and damage reduction. So although your armor isn't super high, the protection is going to give you a 33% damage negation. And then you have the weakness from your spells and your burst skills or something like that that's going to give you that 50% damage negation as well. So you're getting like that 80%, or if it's compounding or multiplicative, I don't really know, but that 80% damage reduction that you can keep up consistently without really having to do much of anything. And I think that's probably going to be the tankiest solo build version if you're going to do this, because this right here, this whole page is core warrior, and all of this is to make you a little bit more tankier. But the whole page here is basically just giving you a little bit more regen, more might regen, more right, and then stability. So if you get the other trait, you basically can just go in here. You're going to lose a little bit of condition cleanse, but you're going to get protection. And then when you use your healing spells, you get protection. But since we use Defiant Stance, it doesn't really do much for you. But since it's so easy to make adrenaline and stuff on the warrior, you're just going to get infinite protection and counter effects, which the counter effect is basically just going to let you block a skill, completely negate it, interrupt people around you. And then if you have any sort of adjustments on the build, if you want to take the Vigor and you want to take the Signet for extra dodges, you're getting, as well as keeping most of the burn damage and stuff that you have. The only difference I can really say is like the crit chance and stuff is a little bit different. And if you don't do the DPS version, you're going to be missing out on some damage buffs. But like if we come in here, and we don't have the damage buffs, it's going to take a little bit longer, and it does take time for the bleeding to stack up. But the longer you're in the fight, the more damage you're going to do. And then the people, even if they get away from you, it's not going to change much. And now if we go to the other one, the only thing I'm a little sad about is because you're not as tanky as the other build was. The other build I liked quite a lot just because of how simple and tanky it was, but just making sure. I might have missed that burst skill. Yeah. But the other thing, though, is the Tempest Runes. You don't necessarily need to have the Tempest Runes for this build. I'm just going to double check on that. Because you don't need the Tempest Runes. But what the Tempest Runes are doing is you heal allies within a 360 radius after breaking a stun. And I don't know if this affects, like, if other allies are using Tempest and you break the stun for them, if it would apply. But it's really good because if you want to keep, say, Shake It Off, and you're not going to run a Shout build, it's still going to heal you for 1100. So you're getting like half the healing that you were. And if you're running the Shout build, you're getting an extra 1100 heal. So it'll heal you for 3000 or something per Shake It Off, and then you get 3 Shake It Offs. So, I mean, there's just a lot of damage potential, or healing potential and stuff there. It's not bad. But you can see you heal plenty with the build. You get a bunch of might, which is spiking your power. You're getting 2500 power. You're getting your ferocity gets up to like 225, 230% ferocity. Your condition damage getting up to 1500. And then you're getting close to 70% crit chance, which is fine. And then you have almost 100% bleed, almost 100% burning. You could get 100% burning if you want, but it's not necessary. The longer you're in the fight, the more bleed that you're doing, the more burning that you're doing, the more physical damage that you're doing, and then you're already healing for quite a lot. Like this fight right here, and most of the fights in the game, you don't need any extra defense. Okay, so this right here gives you a lot of power. All right. And then if you're in a group and you want to go for the... I ain't even using the shout heals on this either, so our healing wasn't nearly what it would have been. But if we go and use the banner, and we just take Signet of Might, switch it over to Wounding Precision, and you're perfectly fine. Or if you want more a Fury generation, say that you don't want to use for Great Justice and you need Fury, you can just swap this out and your burst skills are going to give you Fury. But you can see just the short duration that you're fighting there, like, the auto attack damage slowly goes up. Because we're using a sword, it's not necessarily the highest physical damage weapon, but it applies bleed on every auto attack, and you get the Fury. But if you were to use the more defensive setup, you could go for the 21% increased power, go for the axe, or whatever, which is a more physical damage weapon, and then use the ability that gives you basically that 21% increased damage, and you'd probably be fine. But overall, I think it's a pretty solid build. And if you go for the power option and you go for the axe, you might be thinking that you're going to basically ruin all of your damage or your condition damage. All of it's going to be completely useless. It's still not going to be completely useless because you have the crowd control effects. Like your shield is always going to apply that 20-second blow. Your bow is always going to apply the daze, which is going to apply that 20-second bleed. So shield, 20-second bleed, bows, 20-second bleed, pin down, 20-second bleed. If you use a rifle, that's probably going to be the one that's going to apply the least. But you still have the immobilizing shot, which applies vulnerability. the rifle butt, and then you should have a knockback. I don't know, but rifle butt still gives you 3 targets. I believe, was it only have 1 ammunition? I thought I had 2 before. But 20 seconds, and you get increased vulnerability. So the rifle's giving you vulnerability on its own with its attacks. Then you could just remove Sundering Burst and use something else if you want. There's a lot of flexibility, but this is just the basics of the build. And so hopefully you try it out at some point. I'm not going to say it's the best, but I think in general it's a very strong build that's kind of underrated. Because everything with the warrior for me is based on group play. So a warriors like 5 groups of warriors by themselves, and you use vigorous shouts. Okay, your shouts are going to go up and do 2,000 healing. So 1 use of that with 5 people using it's already 10,000 health. And then you basically have 4 uses of that already 10,000 health by itself. If you all use immobility, I guess the end event's gone. If you're all using immob, then people aren't going to be able to get away from you very easily. If you're not, then it doesn't really matter so much. The only bad thing about this build really is that you can't swap weapons as fast. But the good news is you generally don't have to. But we got a lot of personal healing just with this build. So this is the damage build. Damage setup for the most personal damage, but we're going for the might generation to help our allies. I'm not on a roll today. I literally didn't dodge anything on that. But pretty solid for the most part. I mean, it's not going to be like the most optimized DPS build, but it allows you to keep all of your stun breaks. You have 4 stun breaks, you have 3 damage immunities, you have basically a ton of healing, really good damage in general, physical and condi. So like if you go against something that is like immune to bleeds or whatever, you're still going to have a decent amount of damage. So all of that I think is pretty good. And hopefully y'all guys will try and test this out at some point. I have to get my other warrior to do the protection version of the build, and he's not set up yet for it. But I think it's just interesting. I was going to change the Tempest runes originally, and then I just noticed that, you know, if you can keep your healing, why not, you know? But like our bleed stacks and things right here, just with like a short trade, you can see like our auto attacks go up to 1,000 and our bleeder going to 1,000. See, we're almost 3,000 bleed right there pretty quickly. And then we get the vulnerability, all that stuff for our allies. It's pretty decent. Alright. Well, all in all, pretty solid build. I don't know if it's necessarily as strong as the Ultimate Warrior build was before, because when we played the Ultimate Warrior build, you were getting, I would like to say 2,000 or 3,000 health per stun break with 4+ stun breaks. You were getting 1,000 bonus armor, so we had like 4,000 armor plus a bunch of extra healing. In using the shout builds, plus it was really high damage and it had infinite vigor and infinite protection. All of that together, I think, is like that's what made the Ultimate Warrior build really strong, and it had infinite quickness. So we were pretty much on the cusp with. So it was infinite quickness, which gave us a bunch more might generation, which gave us a much more healing, and then we had we were getting might generation,
We must all do our part.
which is giving us regen. We had adrenal health, which was giving us regen. We had good damage, infinite quickness, which allowed us to apply more might. We had infinite protection, which gave us the biggest damage reduction on top of having the 4,000 armor. We had extra healing. We had shout heals, which didn't require us to have anything major on it. But the big nerf to that was that they changed the trait that gave us the extra healing on stun break and the extra armor. This one, it basically just gets a bunch more extra damage, and it's a hybrid build, which is pretty decent. It still has a bunch of the same effects that we had before, but it's just not as potent as the other ones were. We could probably still do the infinite protection, but you'd lose a lot of DPS if you did that. And for most of the Guild Wars 2 content, I don't think you need that much protection. It doesn't seem like that big of a deal. And we have 12 seconds of damage immunity. And if you swap to get the Vigor, then you're going to get 15 seconds of damage immunity, which you can already see is basically half of the Defiant Stance trait line. I mean, they changed a lot of these traits that reduce the skill cooldown as well. Because like Shield Master, we used to bring this and it would reduce the shield cooldown, and you get it down to like 20 seconds. And so like you would do a 15-second combination and then do shield stance, and then that would allow you to, or you use shield stance in the combination, then you get to use shield stance again, which would give you the 3 seconds needed for defiant stance to work, and then that would give you enough cooldown to wait until the next like endure pain, or it was something like that. But yeah, try the build out. Tell me what you think. Give me some feedback on it. Try it in groups as well, like the shouts and the might generation, just on whatever groups you want. I wanted to use it for warrior combat, but I've did most of the story, the expansion and stuff with this, and literally just stood in one spot don't really have to do much. I've did some of the end events. I went down in the mine shafts without the filters because I wasn't thinking about it when I first went in there. And yeah, the gas can still one-shot you, but if you time it right, you can defiant stance it and complete like negate the damage for the most part. All right, we got to go to work, but